It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, where right now the Texans are plus 2,000 to win the Super Bowl. And it's interesting because the Texans, they just had a draft where it looked very much more like a drafting for need than drafting best player available. That's always dicey getting into that distinction because some of the perception of the Texans having reached for certain players is also based on whatever people's opinion was about those players. For the Texans themselves, and as it is for a lot of teams, it doesn't feel like as much of a reach for them because their boards just look differently than other people's boards. But the old dilemma between drafting for need or drafting best player available is always that, man, for the long-term success of your franchise, yes, intellectually, we all know you shouldn't be trying to patch things up in the short term. Draft the best players available and it'll all sort itself out. But then the short-sighted part of us wants to win now. We want guys that can improve our team right now. And damn it, give me what I want. And the truth is, it's always on a spectrum. It's never completely best player available or drafting specifically for need. I think the Texans have veered more in these last couple of years towards drafting for need and maybe moving up and down the board so you're not overdrafting or underdrafting. But you look at last year, we went into the draft last year saying, man, Texans really need offensive linemen and wide receivers. They went and got an offensive lineman and 2 wide receivers with their first 2 picks. This year, we're saying, man, Texans really need defensive tackles. They need offensive linemen. The tight end we started talking about in the last few weeks, all of these things, and they went out and got them. I think they would have gotten an edge rusher, which we also talked about, except by the time they got down to 59, all that big chunk of reasonable second-round defensive ends were already gone and off the board. So to dive in to all of these picks and a little bit about what I think of each of these guys, Keelan Rutledge, number 26 overall in the first round, offensive lineman, guard/center out of Georgia Tech. Texans traded up a couple of spots, gave away by the points what would have been the equivalent of either a 4th or a 5th round pick, depending on which draft board you're looking at or which points chart you're looking at. But this is one that was really interesting because John Harris had talked to us before the draft on Payne and Pendergast about how, man, Rutledge seems to be a guy that teams probably like more than the draft media had really caught on to, but very, very few people had him projected as going in the first round. They talked about him as a possibility. Some guys like Daniel Jeremiah and others seem to like him, but the Texans go for it. The notable thing here is that Chase Bisontis from A&M, he was still on the board, and most people largely had Chase Bisontis graded higher than Keelan Rutledge. They thought Chase Bisontis was a guy that might sneak into the first round. He had been mocked to the Texans a lot. So those 2 guys were available. The Texans, for whatever reasons they thought fit, they like Keelan Rutledge better than they like Chase Bisontis. The fact that he can play center, and if he does play center, that's very intriguing. I mean, they've got 5 guys on the line now that have played center in some form or fashion, and we'll get to Fabeti Wiiwoo obviously a little bit later because he's one of them. That's interesting. There's going to be genuine competition at center, and I know I already talked about Keelan on last week's podcast a little bit, so we'll go down to number 2 with the number 36 pick overall. Texans jockeyed up a little bit just to be sure they secured this guy. Kaden McDonald, defensive tackle out of Ohio State, 6'3", 327 pounds. I'm guessing 330 most days, but maybe tried to slim down a little bit before the combine. The most interesting thing about Kaden McDonald in terms of him coming to the Texans is that I had friendly debates with a few people about whether the Texans want or need a big-bodied dude like Kaden McDonald. He's a first and second down player as of now. I think he's got upside as a pass rusher, but even Caserio in his press conference said that, look, he's a really good run defender. That's what we're going to focus on now. We'll worry about other development later. And then D'Amico and Caserio both talked about something I've been claiming for a long time, which is that in the Texans defensive system, yes, it's a very aggressive get past the line of scrimmage, penetrating defensive front. But in that philosophy, there's a lot of room to say, hey, we need one guy that can come in, and either play nose tackle or playing over the guard, can two gap. He can just make it simpler and easier for everybody else to play aggressively. If we can have one massive guy that makes it really hard to run up the middle. And I think that's what they're looking at Kaden McDonald as. The football character, the production was really, really good. I'm really excited about this pick. And it's the type of player that, in a previous era in the NFL, I think he would have gone in the first round. These days, defensive tackles don't generally go in the first round unless they're perceived as pass rushers as well. Think T'Vondre Sweat a couple of years ago. Massive human being, awesome versus the run and everything. But he's not going to go in the first round because people don't really look at him as a guy that's going to be on the field on third down all that much. Or at least that's not what they were thinking about him when he was a prospect. And that's what Kaden McDonald is. So now on the defensive line for the Texans, you have a depth, which they need because they like to rotate those guys a lot. You've got, if Kaden McDonald works out well as a pro, I'm always naturally skeptical of anybody, whether they go number one overall or when they got to prove it first that they deserve to be out there. But you've got potentially 4 starting caliber defensive tackles that can rotate through. And they're all different body types, where Sheldon Rankins is more of a classic 3 technique. Tommy Togiai is a 3 technique, but also can be a stout, tough nose tackle type. And he's a good blend of those things. It can also get pressure on third down. You're not terrified if he's out there on third down. Then Kaden McDonald, big body dude. And then Logan Hall, who they brought over in free agency, is very, very versatile. If you think of him maybe as kind of a replacement for Danico Autry, but probably on the bigger side. I think he's bigger than Danico Autry. Fact check me on that. But he can play as a 3 technique. He can go out and play defensive end, classic 5 technique, or out wide. And they've got a lot of options now. So when it comes time to genuinely stop the run, when they have to stop the run, say you're down by 3 points in the fourth quarter and the other team's just trying to run the clock out, you got to stop the run. They didn't really necessarily have enough options there. Now you slap McDonald and Tommy Togiai in there at the same time, or you put in your 5D line package with that extra big beef right over the nose tackle. It gets interesting, gets a lot more powerful. Let's pause for a second and talk about, while we brace ourselves for the Marlon Klein discussion, the fact that the Texans are plus 950 to win the AFC on FanDuel. Just breathe a little bit. I do 7-second breathing, 5.5-second breathing. It's a 7 count. Just in for 5.5 seconds. I count to 7. Works out to be 5.5 seconds. Okay, you calm enough now? Or are you overly stressed trying to think about my weird math on my 5.5-second breathing? The Texans at plus 950 to win the AFC on FanDuel. And they did draft Marlon Klein out of Michigan with the 59th overall pick in the second round. And this is where crap all went crazy. Because, man, he was projected by most people to go a lot lower than that. Daniel Jeremiah had him inside the top 100, but I think that might have been the highest ranking I had seen, somewhere between 90 and 100 or so. But he goes 59 overall when multiple other more highly ranked by the Draftniks tight ends were available. So again, the Texans didn't reach for this necessarily. They knew what they were doing with their eyes wide open, and they liked Marlon Klein better than all of those other guys like Sam Roush or Claire or anybody else that was out there on the board already who would eventually go elsewhere. Marlon Klein, first about the prospect, second about the decision-making with it. Born in Germany, came over to America and went to a school in Georgia specifically because he wanted to come to America and play American football. He fell in love with football while he was in Germany, came to America, played football there, ends up getting a scholarship to Michigan, and he's a backup there his first couple of years, playing behind future NFL starting tight ends like A.J. Barner, Colston Loveland, Schoonmaker, and as well as another couple good tight ends. So he had to bide his time, ends up being a starter last year and didn't have a whole lot of production as a receiver. But part of that is I think they had a freshman quarterback and the offense in general just wasn't operating the way we've seen Michigan's offense be able to operate. So I think they give him a little bit of a pass there. When you look at his frame, he's 6'6", he's 250 pounds, like pretty much every other tight end in the draft this year. But what's really intriguing is just his reach and his target is very, very big. and he's shown an ability to reel in some errant passes. He's held onto the ball through some hospital ball type situations. He's a work in progress as a blocker. He's got some really good, if you watch his highlight reel, you'll see a bunch of really good blocks. There's other times where, man, he's and you always give a pass a little bit when they're trying to block defensive ends, but these are college defensive ends, not NFL defensive ends. There's times where he'll kind of get thrown around a little bit, but there's other times where he just really keeps after it. The one impressive thing is George Kittle will always say, pass blocking as a tight end is the art of getting your butt kicked slowly. So sometimes when I'm watching tight ends, I'm more concerned with, okay, does he keep his feet moving? Is he staying after this guy? Sometimes as a tight end, even if you're getting your ass kicked, you just got to keep fighting to be a speed bump as much as possible. And that's part grit. That's just part attitude and mentality. He does have that. I think the Texans, if they took him here, just had reason to believe that other teams also liked Marlon Klein, and who knows, or they fell in love with him early in the process, perhaps. D'Amico talked in the press conference afterwards that he really liked his meeting with Marlon Klein and seems to have formed an affinity for him there. I get a little bit nervous, and this is after me just being super optimistic about everything for 72 hours. Reality is going to start sinking in. I'm going to start letting my imagination go places. I both love and am made nervous by the fact that this draft really seems like it has D'Amico Ryan's fingerprints on it in terms of identifying guys who are swarm, identifying guys who have great football character. I started going through the list of which of these guys were captains earlier, and I'm going to be surprised if out of this entire draft class, more than two of them weren't captains, because I just kept seeing captain. And the downside of that is always, okay, if you got a team full of really awesome lunch pail, right type of guys, you can be really good with that, but you also still have to have your studs. They have those studs on defense. They have a couple of studs on offense. You need to have as many studs as possible and find that right blend. I'm all for doing your own thing and having your own board. The Texans this year were way outside the consensus, up in based on one graph that I saw that did the analysis, just their picks relative to a consensus big board, kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of the mock drafts. The Texans were in the top three for most aggressive reaches. The 49ers were the other one, and then the Jaguars were just went and blew everybody else away in terms of wherever they thought guys should go. When we do that, you're either smarter than everybody or you're dumber than everybody. It tells you very quickly, especially if you're an organization that does that all the time. If you think you're smarter than the crowd all the time, generally you're either a genius or, man, you were really high on yourself. Nick isn't typically as aggressive. I know we've had a few in the last couple of years, but the draft last year was so good that I'm inclined to give him a break on this one. I'm also happy to see that D'Amico's getting more involved, it seems, on identifying the right kinds of guys on offense. We know he can identify the right kinds of guys on defense. We just want to get tough, gritty, lunch pail dudes on offense. And speak of the devil, in the fourth round, number 106 overall, out of Oklahoma, offensive lineman Fabeti Wiiwoo. It's the first time I haven't had it spelled out phonetically in front of me. It's spelled way differently than that. But Fabeti Wiiwoo out of Oklahoma. This is a guy that went probably about where a lot of people expected him to go, sometime around the fourth or fifth round, and super, super strong. You can see it in his play. I don't need to watch his workout videos or look at his combine stats. He is strong and put together and uses that weight room strength functionally. So sometimes guys are strong and they look solid, but their technique's all over the place. He uses a really wide base, gets up underneath guys, locks them down with his hands. He's just not all that fleet of foot. So that's why you go in the fourth round. He's going to be an interior offensive lineman. He's started a few games at center, so this is another guy that's in the mix for potential centers and could get some snaps there during training camp. I think that job is up for grabs right now between Jake Andrews and everybody else. But Fabeti Wiiwoo, not that fleet of foot, but the thing that was really impressive to me was I saw a lot of instances of him being really effective as a puller. So a lot of times when you think, oh, okay, if a guy's a puller, it doesn't have to be one of your more athletic offensive linemen. Not if he's really efficient and really understands where he's supposed to fit. And that jumped off the screen at me when he had his eyes on his potential target, and when there was movement or the look was changing, he adjusted to it immediately. A lot of times when he got to the end of the line and he was supposed to seal a defensive end, he whipped his hips right around. So for a guy who at first blush doesn't look like he moves all that fluidly, he might not be all that athletic, I actually came away more impressed than I thought I would. And I read the reports before I ever sat down and really watched any chunks of him playing for an extended period. But I came away thinking, all right, there's something more here. And at the very least, if he can provide depth at the interior offensive line, it adds to the competition. And we all know the Texans' offensive line has not had all that much competition these last few years. The battles during training camp, and I'm saying that aspirationally, hoping that there are battles in training camp between the Texans offensive line and the Texans defensive line. It'll be something we haven't seen in a few years, because we've spent the last couple of years wondering, wow, are the Texans going to have 6 all-pro defensive tackles this year? Because they're just destroying the interior offensive line of whoever is in there for the Texans. There are a lot of backups competing with other backups to be starters for the Texans on the interior offensive line. This year, I think it's a lot different. Next 4th-round pick, number 123 overall, linebacker Wade Woodaz out of Clemson. And this is a fun one because he is a guy who's a converted safety. He's tall and he's long. He's 6'3" or so, long limbs, but somewhat raw as a linebacker. And that's the thing where it gets really exciting thinking about the Texans working with Wade Woodaz. He has great speed, like straight line speed. He loves to play the run. He'll come up almost to a fault, or definitely to a fault at times, where he's just so hyper aggressive versus the run that he needs to learn to really trust his keys, not get snookered on play action and all of that. But we saw this with the Texans defense. D'Amico's first year in 2023, those linebackers were hyper aggressive versus the run, and they got victimized in play action. Then over the course of the last 2 years, they flipped the script completely on that. And they're one of the smartest and best teams in the league against play action. And a lot of that just comes down to this Texans coaching staff's ability to be able to just drill the right technique, the right reads, the right keys into these guys' heads. So I think there's a lot of potential there. He's played a lot of special teams and been very effective at it. So Frank Ross, somebody said, I think it was Nick, that talked about how Frank Ross was so excited about this one. So this is a combination. Hey, Henry To'oTo'o is on the last year of his deal. Azeez Al-Shaair is on the last year of his deal. I think Azeez probably gets extended. I don't know if they're eager or working on extending Henry To'oTo'o, but this is a competitive situation where Wade Woodaz might have a chance to either supplant To'oTo'o. He's not going to supplant Azeez either this year or next year. D'Amico, since he's been here, hasn't had a linebacker situation like he had when he was in San Francisco. When you think about when all 3 of these guys were healthy, with Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, and Azeez Al-Shaair, who was an undrafted rookie free agent in San Francisco, that's a hellacious group of linebackers you can have out there. And Azeez was their 3rd linebacker there. So the ability of a guy like Woodaz, who, again, real long limbs and very athletic. So when he's back there in a zone or he's getting himself in a passing lane, was really adept at that in college. And I think they're going to hope to build on that. And then immediately, I think you're going to see a presence on special teams. So I'm intrigued by Wade Woodaz. This will be interesting. Also had a good quote in the press conference about just why he didn't transfer. He said, "I'm not a quitter." And he didn't want to just be chasing money, basically, to paraphrase. He doesn't want to be that kind of guy, which is cool, but also just be kind of careful, because you're in the NFL now. A lot of guys that transferred who probably don't consider themselves quitters. Dabo Swinney would have been brainwashing him a certain amount there too. You know, Dabo doesn't like to participate in the transfer portal, and as such, when he wants to retain his own guys, he's going to have to really put the guilt trip on him to stick around. Next draft pick, number 5, or 5th round, number 141 overall, safety / corner, but mostly safety, Kamari Ramsey out of USC. Oh, defensive back out of USC. You don't say. Yeah, they took Kalen Bullock. Then they took Jalen Smith. Along the way, they also drafted Woody Marks, a running back. But they like these guys from USC, who on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's an opportunity there because USC recruits really well. It's the allure and the appeal of USC. But I don't know if they always do the best of getting the most out of these guys. And I think the Texans kind of look at USC as distressed assets. And you take a guy like Kalen Bullock and end up turning him into something much more and better than I think a lot of people projected because he was a young player. He seemed undersized and skinny, and he's come and just grown by leaps and bounds. Woody Marks, we know we like him. Jalen Smith coming off that knee injury. We'll find out what they have him in this year. But Greg Cosell had a quote from before the draft about Kamari Ramsey, and I thought it was interesting because he said something that sounded like what you might be able to say about Kalen Bullock, that this might be the kind of guy that has a better pro career than college career. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, and it is, but it does happen. There are a lot of guys, and it happens at every position. It happens on the offensive line more than you'd expect. Because I think sometimes guys will get drafted out of the NFL that sometimes their college teammates will be like, huh, him, huh? And hey, every now and then the scouts know what they're doing. They turn them into something much, much more. You know, like Danielle Hunter wasn't productive in college. He was a specimen and a freak, but he wasn't a productive pass rusher in college. He got some good coaching, worked his butt off, and now he's Danielle freaking Hunter. 6th round pick to the Houston Texans at number 204 overall. Louis Bond out of a Bill O'Brien coached Boston College. You're going to see things like this, more quick than he is fast, etc., etc., etc. He's a chain mover. I think all-time leading receiver for Boston College. I can't remember if that's on the total reception or yardage side, but I hesitate to say a poor man's version of Stephon Diggs, but let's call him that. Let's say if you're just thinking about a shifty guy that's not necessarily going to beat you on deep routes. Again, I'm saying a poor man's version of Stephon Diggs, but very secure hands, very intelligent. And that's one thing that keeps coming up. The Ivy League schools recruited him. Like this is a guy that if you're going to project him to play in the slot, that's one of the hardest things as a rookie to do is to read coverages, adjust your routes based on leverage, and be on the exact same page as the quarterback. And that's why you don't typically see a lot of guys excel at the slot when they're younger players. It takes some time. They've already got Jalen Noel. You know, they've got Tank Dell, who's not a slot receiver, but he will play in the slot. If we're just thinking about smaller body types of guys. So there's some competition there. Louis Bond, obviously, like anybody who's a late round pick and a skill position players hopefully can contribute somewhere on special teams. But there's a lot to like about him. I mean, he just, you've turned on his highlight reel and it's first down after first down after first down. And then every now and then there's a touchdown or something, but it's a whole lot of just churning out first downs. Final pick of the draft, and I'll do the UDFAs, the undrafted rookie free agents, sometime later this week. Aiden Fischer, linebacker out of Indiana, 243rd pick overall. And I think there's a couple things that go into this. It's interesting. He's almost the negative image or the opposite image, you know, not negative in a bad way, but just on the scouting report when you go to Wade Woodaz. Wade Woodaz is super fast, untapped potential in a lot of ways, raw by linebacker standards. Aiden Fischer is the opposite, and the ding on him is his athleticism. He's not as impressive with his measurables, but he's played on a really good football team, a really, really good football team. And he is that quintessential Mike linebacker that's going to make all the calls, going to get everybody lined up, going to know where everybody's going to be, and everything that goes along with it. So there are your draft picks. There are 8 draft picks. I don't know why I don't know that off the top of my head. 8 draft picks for the Texans. I'm pleased with this draft. I'm waiting and seeing on Marlon Klein. I see exactly what they see in him. I'm curious about where they drafted him. It's just really interesting, and you hope that it's one of those instances where, nope, turns out the Texans are smarter than everybody else that thought that Marlon Klein shouldn't have gone as high as he did. I think the big question now is, what do they do at edge rusher, where I think they still need to replace some of the pass rush that they lost between Danico Autry and Derek Barnett. Does that come via trade? Does it come by a free agent? Guys like Joey Bosa are still out there. I don't think it's going to be Kayvon Thibodeau. I'd be really surprised. I'm not so sure if Kayvon Thibodeau fits the Houston Texans culture, which isn't a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just not so sure. But I also have no idea what he's become over these last several years and whether some of those scouting reports before the draft had any actual fire to the smoke or anything. I don't know. I'm not holding my breath over that one. So we'll see. It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. If you're listening on Apple, please leave a 5-star review and maybe something nice to say. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and everybody have a great day.